All right. Okay, so we lost our stream, so we are back here. We'll give everybody a minute to find us again. We are here. I am here. Just wasting time. Yes. All right, so we just talked to Nicole from Exotic Critters Excursions in Shreveport. Nicole is awesome. She used to work with us here at Schoolhouse Safari, and we were sad for her to move to Shreveport, but very happy to see her make her own awesome excursion experience. So, next up, Heather brought some really cute little babies. These babies are actually available. Oh, and Joey's here. Yep. This is Joey. You all know Joey. Joey Exotic from Aquarium Central. Joey has some new babies for sale. I think this is his first time that you've had this type of animal for sale at the store.
Yeah,
yes.
First time that we've had cockatiels. In the past we've had birds, smaller birds, but these are some hand-fed baby cockatiels. You want to tell us a little bit about how old they are?
I'm actually not sure how old these guys are. I'd have to ask my mom, but they're only like 2 to 3 weeks away from being on seed. So right now we're still hand feeding them baby food. And yeah, in just a couple of weeks they'll all be ready once they're eating seed and healthy. So there's 6 of them here, but one of them's already sold, so we have 5 right now. And I think we'll have 2 more later on. And potentially more after that, we'll see.
Right, so these guys, they make pretty good pets. I think it's one of the best beginner parrots or birds in general. They tend to bond to their owners very easily. They're very vocal. The males will whistle and have the ability to also learn some words and phrases. And about how long do you think these guys live? Probably at least 30, 40 years?
Yeah, I think around 20, 25 years or something like that.
Oh, that's still plenty
quite a while.
Enough. Yes. And what we'll be doing is we're currently taking deposits, $50 deposits on these babies, and their price will be $150 in total. And like Heather said, they'll be ready in about 2 to 3 weeks, right? Yeah, yeah.
And what kind of setup do they need?
So they need a fairly nice-sized cage. They are a medium-sized bird, so something at least about 2 to 2.5 feet tall and about 18 inches wide would be perfect for a single cockatiel. And of course, they're pretty easy to take care of otherwise. They eat a cockatiel seed blend. And of course, they love treats and all kinds of different enrichment toys, plastic toys, coconut, lava toys, anything to help trim their beaks down. Otherwise, they're pretty straightforward. But they are a lot of maintenance as far as being social, so they will definitely beg to be handled and to be loved. They really love to just sit on your shoulder, be cuddled, and they definitely need that. So if you can spend a lot of time with them, they're a really, really good pet. If you're busy, you may want to get something different like a reptile that doesn't need quite as much attention. And they're currently being fed KT bird formula for a couple more weeks until they wean onto seed. And Heather, these guys get it every about 3 hours?
Yeah, we're feeding them every 3 hours right now. And then as they get older, it'll be less often. And then we'll introduce them to seed probably here in about a week.
Yep.
2 of them are quite a bit older than the rest, so they'll be ready a little sooner. But
now, will they keep this color, or they'll think it'll change as they molt?
So you can kind of see, like, this one has a little white head and is all gray, so we don't think this one will have any like yellow color. And most of them, kind of the colors that they have, I think will stay.
Gotcha.
Oh, babies.
They're all begging for food.
Oh yeah, it's a handful with 6 of them. My mom is really spending a lot of time with these guys. I don't know who to feed.
They'll basically eat that till their crop's full.
Yeah, they will. Yeah. And they're so messy. And then my mom's dog actually licks their faces and cleans them off.
So you heard that? They're dog friendly.
Yeah.
As long as the dog is friendly to them.
Right. Oh yeah, they're around. We handle them every day, all day, so they're gonna be really sweet birds.
So if somebody's looking for a very interesting, talkative pet that loves to be handled, I would recommend these guys.
Alright. You'll all get fed soon, I promise.
So cute.
All right.
Whoa!
Whoa.
Alright, so I think we're done with the
Oh, we left a little something there.
Oh, sorry about that.
Okay, so now, hey bud. Now Joey is going to talk a little bit about animal adaptations.
Right, so we're starting a series about animal adaptations and how they adapt to the environment, and also why they are the way they are right now. So there's a snapshot in time that we're going through right now. Did you realize that 99.9% of all life that ever existed on this planet is now extinct? Pretty crazy, huh?
Wow.
Yeah, so we are just a very, very small snapshot in time. So what we're going to talk about today is reptiles, and I think we got some time, so I'm going to try to go as fast as I can.
We can go as long as you want. I don't think very many people have very many places to be.
Well, that may be true. So we're going to talk about what makes a reptile a reptile. I'm going to take out Truffle right here, a little resident hermit tortoise. So we can start
Mommy,
talking
a
about
little
her.
bit of your
And I think I'm gonna take a
glasses
seat
are in
here.
are over the camera, so I can't see. I can't
So-
even see her nose.
What's really interesting about reptiles is that today we have quite a few different groups and species of reptiles. Is it working?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So, like Truffle here, we have about 350 species of turtles and tortoises that live worldwide. About half of those are actually threatened by human activities because they suffer from loss of habitat, and quite frankly, they are on the diet, so some people do feed on them around the world. But there's a lot of conservation going on to protect turtle and tortoise species, so some of them are making a great comeback. The others are crocodilians, which include both crocodiles and alligators. There's only 24 species worldwide. We also have snakes, which make up about 4,000 species of reptiles. And of about those 4,000 species, only 375 are venomous. And of those 375, only a handful of them are actually dangerous to humans. It's a relatively small amount. The remainder would be about 6,000 species of lizards. So there are quite a few lizards worldwide. And one that we oftentimes forget, and is the most diverse group of reptiles that lives today, are birds. There's over 10,000 species of birds worldwide. So oftentimes we forget that birds are reptiles, and they absolutely are. So how do we get something like a reptile? Well, it started about 320 million years ago, during the Carboniferous period, when we had these amphibians that were basically living more and more on land. Most amphibians at the time had to go back to the water to lay their eggs, like today's frogs and salamanders. Their eggs simply would just dry out if they were laid on land. So essentially what happens is you have these salamander-like animals that became more and more involved in living in drier habitats. Their skin became much more scaly, like we see here in our little truffle, to prevent them from drying out. So after millions and millions of years, this group eventually became known as reptilomorphins. And what that means is it's amphibians that are starting to look a lot more like reptiles. They have dry, scaly skin to protect themselves from drying out. They live pretty far away from the water, so it becomes a chore for them to get closer to moist habitats to lay eggs. So essentially what happens over time is the egg became bound in a membrane and surrounded by calcium carbonate. So we call that the amniotic egg. So reptiles and reptile relatives all started off laying these amniotic eggs like they still do today. So it's a hard-shelled egg that they can lay on land so they don't have to go to water. So that egg that we think about is much like a chicken egg, a snake egg, a lizard egg. They're all very, very similar. So that egg has tiny, tiny holes in it that allows oxygen exchange. And that oxygen exchange keeps that embryo alive. So once you have these groups of animals that are living on land now, you start to see changes in their skulls. So one thing that makes a reptile is their skull is somewhat different than amphibians and fish. So in amphibians and fish, the muscle attachment has no attachment to specific holes in the skull, which are called temporal fenestra. I know it's a lot to take in, but with reptiles, with true reptiles, so think of something like an alligator. They actually have two holes on each side of the skull for muscle attachment. So they're called diaspid reptiles, or reptiles in general are called diaspids. It's a condition of their skull. So a lot of times we think, oh, it's a reptile. It's got scales. It lays eggs. Maybe we think that they're cold-blooded. And which is true that lots of reptiles are cold-blooded, but there are also lots of reptiles that are warm-blooded. Like all birds are able to regulate their body temperatures. Sea turtles can actually partially regulate their body temperatures based on their muscle activity. So that's a very interesting adaptation for those types of reptiles. Another thing that is a little bit difficult to understand, but reptiles and mammal relatives both lay eggs. So in today's world, we see things like a platypus or an echidna, and they lay eggs as well. But they're not reptiles, they're mammals. And one of the biggest differences between a reptile and a mammal is not so much that one lays eggs and one doesn't, but it more has to do with the fact that mammals actually have one opening on each side of their skull. They come from a group of amniotes called synapses, so they are morphologically different. Turtles and tortoises, like truffle here, they date back about 220 million years ago. Tortoises and turtles, their relatives actually had what seems more like a normal lizard-like shape, but their vertebrae became more flattened, and so did their ribs. Same thing right here with their sternum, just like our sternum plate, became more and more flattened, which the shell actually protects them from predators. So turtles have been around for a very, very long time. Now, what's not known about turtles and tortoises is exactly how they're related to other types of reptiles. So tortoises and turtles have skulls that aren't quite in line with the other types of reptiles that we talked about with two holes on each side of the skull. We believe through fossil evidence that tortoises and turtles are either very closely related to what's called archosaur reptiles, which would be dinosaurs and alligators and birds, than they are to lizards and snakes. And that's based mostly on genetic data and somewhat of their morphology. We don't know for 100%. They could also be very, very closely related to groups we don't understand yet because we just simply haven't found them in the fossil record. But we do know that they are much more closer related to other reptiles than they are to, say, things like mammals. So that's pretty much it for these guys. So the next group I'm going to talk about is going to be archosaurs, and I'm going to get one out for us.
I can get one if you want.
You want to get one? Okay, cool. Got it? Oh, not quite. You want to hold him while I talk? So this is Hansen, he's a cockatiel. And cockatiels are a type of archosaur, and what that means is archosaurs are an ancient group of reptiles that differ from snakes and lizards because their teeth actually have deep sockets. So today's archosaurs are birds and alligators and crocodiles. Now you think to yourself, well, birds don't have teeth with deep sockets. They lost them over 120 million years ago. So all of the different archosaurs that used to live are going to be things like dinosaurs, and birds are a type of dinosaur that are actually related to true raptors, the dromads. They broke off from dromads, their closest relative, like a velociraptor, which was also fully feathered, they just couldn't fly, about 150 million years ago. Now, one thing about a bird's beak is at one point in time, they really didn't have beaks. They had a toothy mouth, just as you would see in their cousin alligators and crocodiles. So over time, they became better adapted to use a beak instead of teeth, and essentially ended up losing all their teeth, which was a huge benefit for birds in general, because birds have a light beak instead of a heavy mouth with teeth, so it allows them better to fly. So other types of archosaurs would be that have actually gone extinct would be things like pterosaurs, which we're kind of familiar with, pterodactyls, which aren't actually related to birds that closely. They actually had their fingers on were like membranes, like we see in bats, where the actual, you call it like the little pinky finger, was extended in pterodactyls, and they would simply open it up and kind of glide around like we see more like the bats than birds. Of course, they did have powered flight and whatnot, just like birds do. But birds instead actually are covered in feathers. They have relatively no membranes. We've seen things like chicken wings, and we've eaten chicken wings before most people have. And what happens in birds is these three fingers that all dromads and theropod dinosaurs, which includes the Tyrannosaurus, which has one of them missing, so it's got two little fingers. So their three fingers actually ended up fusing together. Two of them did. And they have a little tiny nail at the tip. At least some birds still do. And even one type of bird is still capable of climbing as a chick, which is called a hoax, and they actually have claws on their hands, which they use to clamber around trees in South America. But as they get older, they lose the claws, and they look much more bird-like because all their feathers grow. So the next group that we're going to talk about is the Lepidosaurians. So Lepidosaurs, as the root word means, it means scaly lizard. So Lepidosaurs are actually snakes and lizards. Now, as far as we know, snakes actually branched off from a monitor-like relative about 100 million years ago, 100 to 120 million years ago. And they started off, obviously, with legs. Oh, you can grab a snake. So they started off with legs, and as they became more and more fossorial, and fossorial means that they burrow. So they actually would spend most of their time underground. And we see a lot of things that burrow, their legs tend to get smaller and smaller, especially if they're cold-blooded. So some examples would be there's 3 or 4 different types of legless lizards. Snakes are just one of those avenues. So snakes specifically ended up losing their front legs first and then their rear legs somewhere around 100 million years ago. They became more and more adapted to living underground, so they just simply didn't need legs after a period of time. And as a consequence of that, they would oftentimes feed on things that were also underground. So you can think of things like small mammals, lizards. Now, without any limbs, these guys living in burrows and whatnot, they became more and more adapted to eat less and less because food is less and less frequent sometimes. So their jaws became more and more adapted to feed on larger and larger prey. So they don't have to feed as often. So when we think of things like snakes, they can actually go sometimes several months without feeding, while lizards, on the other hand, most lizards, they have to eat every few days or they would eventually starve. It's a pretty big difference between snakes and lizards. So our we don't have a representation, but there's one other group I'd like to talk about that is a reptile. It's called Rhynchocephalids. Now most people have not heard of these. They're called tuatara. So tuatara are actually a type of lizard that's found only in New Zealand. And they differ very much from true lizards because they have these sharp incisors right in the front. Their mouth looks completely different than other lizards. Also, their skeleton is very different. So about 200 million years ago, lizards and tuatara branched off. So we only have one species of tuatara that lives today in New Zealand. They're fairly rare. I think their population is secure. They did have some issues with rats as they're being introduced to New Zealand. But they're a very, very unique group of lizards, and most of them actually, well, I correct myself, they're actually not a lizard. They're a type of reptile. They look like lizards, and they're related. They're evolutionarily different types of lizards altogether. So it's, again, a different reptile altogether. They're very lizard-like. So that's pretty much all the different groups of reptiles. Again, alligators and crocodiles are today's closest living relatives to birds, and it sounds really off. But if you think about it, they have a nest. They have parental care. They have a few anatomical features that are much closer to each other than to lizards. When we look at an alligator, we would think, wow, it would be closer to a lizard than a bird, right? Just because of the way it looks. But actually, it's the exact opposite. Without all seeing dinosaurs alive, it's a little bit difficult to understand, but I think that's it. So, you got any questions? Or?
Let me hop behind the camera and see if we have any questions, but I think you answered most of them. You got it? Okay. No, I think we're good.
Yeah.
Well, if you do end up having any questions, you're welcome to send us a Facebook message.
That's right, yep.
Or comment below. We'll have these videos posted for the week. And I believe we'll be doing another animal adaptation talk. We will keep you guys posted on Facebook when. I do believe we're going to be here next Friday.
I think so.
Again, we'll keep you guys posted on Facebook. So thank you guys so much for watching.
Thanks, guys.
Remember, we are here at Aquarium Central. We are still open regular days, which are Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, from 12 to 6. Yep. We've got fish and little baby cockatiels. And do we have any baby hedgehogs still for sale?
No, we actually sold out of hedgehogs, but I have a couple of females that are pregnant right now, but it'll be a couple of months out.
So stay tuned for baby hedgehogs, and we've got baby crested geckos probably
coming up, right?
Coming up
probably in
soon.
the next month or so, because they're still eggs and they have a 60-day incubation time. So I know some of them's got a head start. So we'll keep you guys posted on what's available, and I guess till then, see you next week.
All right, thank you for watching Facebook.
Thanks. Yeah. Sorry.